Hi everyone, for ZDNet, I'm Karen Roby with Danny Palmer here talking about ransomware. And these attacks are on the rise, Danny. Of course, we talk about it all the time and trying to remind people of just how easily this can happen to them. But an interesting article here you put together, though, about what some of them are choosing to do once they've been attacked.
Yes, well, a brief rundown of ransomware is that it works because when cyber criminals encrypt a network's files, they hold that organization to ransom and say, give us, $100,000 or more likely millions of dollars in Bitcoin in order to, restore the network. In some cases, organizations are paying this, which is why ransomware works. In other cases, there are organizations who are not paying the ransom and are instead restoring their network from their own backups, even though that can take weeks or even months, just because they don't want to give in to the demands of cyber criminals. What cyber criminals have started doing in order to further sort of pressure organizations into paying is stealing data from that organization. So a lot of times now, when organizations are affected by ransomware, they'll also get the ransom note saying, we've encrypted your files, pay us $2 million. And there's also the added threat: if you do not pay, we will start leaking these files we stole. And often the attackers will sort of publish a small selection of what they have, and ultimately as proof of what their intention, what they want to do. That is something that is also forcing a lot of organizations to go, okay, fine, we'll pay up. What is interesting, though, is there are organizations which do have backups, so can restore their networks themselves, but they're also choosing to pay the ransom because they don't want that data being leaked. Because ultimately, if they are going to restore the network themselves, that takes time. And if the cyber criminals, they're not going to wait around in order to get that payment, they will leak that data. So it's a bit of a weird situation where they are almost paying the cyber criminals to shut up and go away, basically going, look, we'll restore the data ourselves, but we'll restore our systems ourselves, but just do not leak our data. It's an interesting thing because ultimately as well, they're paying cyber criminals here. Who's to say that they're not going to take the money, then publish that data anyway? But it just goes to show that ransomware is still a massive problem for organizations, and that ransomware gangs are still evolving their techniques in order to make it profitable, which it still very much is in 2021.
Yeah, and sad and scary that these companies or organizations feel like they have to negotiate. You've already done your damage, but let us clean it up on the back end. But in the meantime, please don't leak our data. And we talked about them being on the rise, these attacks, because they work, Danny, of course. But it sounds like they could get even more disruptive as we head into 2021.
Yeah, well, things like this just go to show that the attackers always have a plan. And there's various other aspects where that ransomware attackers could, if they wanted to, they could go for. I mean, there's some forms of ransomware which will specifically target industrial control systems and factories, because you shut down something like that, that's a problem. Imagine if hackers managed to gain access to electricity, electricity company, and shut down the power. That's going to cause issues. We've seen, and there's many instances where cyber attackers have infected hospitals with ransomware, because ultimately hospitals are kind of the ultimate victim for these attackers, because a hospital cannot afford for its network to be offline for a sustained amount of time, especially now with everything that's going on in the world. So in many cases, hospitals will admittedly grudgingly pay this because of the need to get the networks online. And it's kind of a murky area for even cyber criminals. There's been some, I've seen analysis of underground forums or screen grabs of these forums where the hackers and cyber criminals are basically arguing amongst themselves about whether it's sort of morally right to attack a hospital with ransomware. For some of them, it is just kids. Well, you can't do that because people might die, and others just going, well, that's more. That's why they need to pay. So it's kind of an odd situation where a lot of these networks are very vulnerable, and and as discussed with everything that's going on right now here in the UK, they were in the pandemic is as worse as it's ever been. Hospitals are a much needed function right now and cannot afford to be offline. Even if they have backups, restoring from those backups will take time. So paying the ransom is often seen as the quickest way, unfortunately, even though law enforcement, security firms all say don't do it because it perpetuates why ransomware works. But if you're told, your network is down and you've got patients in intensive care who ultimately might die if you don't pay the ransom, so hospitals will feel as if they've got another option, unfortunately.
Yeah, and it sounds good, when it hasn't happened to you and you hear from law enforcement, don't pay, don't negotiate, none of those things. But when these organizations find themselves right in the middle of an attack, like you said, if it's a hospital system or even a university, they've got to act quickly, and it's really a shame that it happens so often. And Danny, we say the same things over and over, but patching systems, one of the best things people can do to help keep those defenses up.
It is, yeah, because the patches ultimately close security vulnerabilities, which hackers are taking advantage of in order to push these attacks. We've mentioned it before, I'm sure, but the reason WannaCry ransomware was so successful was because a lot of organizations still hadn't applied the critical updates that they were told to apply 2 months before. Hence, here in the UK, it affected a lot of hospital systems. Fortunately, not in a really bad way, but no, it spread very quickly. So yeah, that's one of the key ways this can happen. And as mentioned, backups, have those available and have in order so you don't have to pay the ransom demands. And yeah, and yeah, doing things like patching and making sure default credentials are not used across the network should hopefully stop attackers getting into the network to the extent you have to be relying on your backups. Because as we've discussed today, sometimes that's, yeah, the cyber criminals are going to find a way to sort of twist the knife in order to try and make you pay, even if you do have your backups, unfortunately.
Right. And like you said, when you're most vulnerable, which we are right now, the whole world really, and that's unfortunately when they take advantage of people. Danny, a great article again up on ZDNet explaining this, in more detail and what people need to keep in mind. That again, up on ZDNet. We hope you guys will check it out there. We appreciate you watching.